Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to have a look at another collaboration beer. So this one is half Swedish on the home side, half German on the away side. Out of the two breweries involved in this one, it is only the Swedish brewery that's featured on the channel before, and they've featured a good number of times. But the German brewery is one that is completely new to me. I have heard of them before, but this will be their very first time on the channel. But when it comes to the Swedish brewery, I would say that they are best known for their different kinds of New England hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs, but also their big, juicy, fruity, modern, Nordic, whatever we're going to call them, sour beers. But the German brewery seems to be a very well respected one. They seem to do quite a few different styles, and I guess this is a brewery that we will need to look at again further down the line and do a solo brewery beer review for them in the future. So yeah, very curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. But the beer itself is a style that I know the home brewery can do very, very well. We've had a good number of these from them before. It's also one of their latest releases through Systembolaget here in Sweden, and it's always cool to introduce new German breweries to you here on the channel as well. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for the Swedish and home side of things in this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again. Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing Gothenburg beers because it is just channel tradition these days. But for this review, we are going to return to the wonderful Duck Pond Brewing. So this particular beer is called Let It Be. It comes in at 8% ABV, and this is another New England hazy imperial double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. But this one is also brewed in collaboration with Blech Brut, who are from Bamberg in Franconia in the northern part of Bavaria in Germany, a very, very famous beer town. But these guys are, of course, one of the more kind of modern American style craft breweries in Germany. But they act mainly as a kind of contractor gypsy brewer as well as they brew a lot of their beers a little bit further south actually. So yeah, very curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. As I said, this beer was released as part of the Lokalt och Småskaligt assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for February of 2022. So yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about both the breweries involved here before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery websites, the link to my other reviews that I've done from DuckPond Brewing before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the future, but there's also a list there for my future reviews that I'll do from Blech Brut, the very first time that I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. Just go into the homepage, use the search bar, put your hometown, state, county, whatever in there, and if I've reviewed beers from the local area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one both in the Swedish playlist and in the German playlist, since it is dual nationality, and there are playlists there from many other countries that you can check out as well. But yeah, let's go on then and have a little look at my notes for both of these breweries then. We'll start off with Duck Pond Brewing, since they are the home brewery in this case. So Duck Pond Brewing were of course originally known as Microphone Bryggeriet, or the Microphone Brewery in English, and this company is the brainchild of Nikola Sarcevich, who is a singer and songwriter for the band Millencolin, who have been making music since 1993. So the band was originally based in Örebro, out to the west of Stockholm, but then they took a break, and at this point Nikola moved over to Göteborg, Gothenburg on the west coast. But in 2013 he began brewing with his friend Christian Silva while he was studying international marketing in Skövde, and the two were brewing just very small 20-litre batches together, but they really enjoyed it, and it was this that prompted Nikola to go down to Berlin in Germany to take a 2-week brewing course. But the two then started the company together officially, and it was based for a while in Nikola's house, and at this point they were brewing 200-litre batches. So they changed their name After having some very early success, they changed their name in the summer of 2019, mainly because they felt that Microphone Brigadier was quite a difficult name for foreign people to spell and remember, so they wanted something that was a little bit more English friendly. And on the back of changing their name, they've increased their international sales and also their output in the last few years. But that year in 2019, they managed to produce around 70,000 litres of beer, and they're also one of the co-owners of the Wizard Brewing brand, along with Morgendagens Brewery, although I understand Morgendagens have recently gone bust, which is a shame because they were very good as well. But originally they were producing most of their beers at Popos Brewery in Jonseren and also quite a few at Odd Island Brewery in Mölndal to the south of Gothenburg, but these days they've got their own premises in Kungston, and they recently hired Magnus Lorén to come in as their new head brewer. They still brew a number of their beers at Odd Island as well, from what I understand, and they transport the beer in tanks to ferment and be treated at their own facility in Kungston. But I do understand that they're hoping to get their own brew kit into that facility at some stage as well. But as of February 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 80 different kinds of beer under the Duck Pond name, and prior to that there were about 25 or so had been released under the Microphone Brigadier name. So yeah, about 100 beers or so from this brewery in total. But as I said, over the years these guys have become very well renowned for their New England hazy IPAs and also for their big modern fruity juicy sour beers, which are both of which are very popular these days. So I would recommend that you check out this brewery if you're interested in Swedish beer, and those are style categories that tickle your fancy. But yeah, that is everything I can really tell you about Duck Pond Brewing for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with the latest goings on, and you can check out the Untappd page to learn a wee bit more about all the different beers that they've done. But yeah, let's head south then now and go to the German side of things. So, Blech Brut. So, Blech Brut, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Bamberg, a very famous beer town in Franconia in the northern part of Bavaria, the area in the world which has the highest density of breweries per head of population, which is quite impressive, and home to many famous breweries like Schlenkerla, Spezial, Festla, Käsemann, Marsbräu, all of these kind of things. But the man behind Blech Brut is Benedikt Steiger, and he originally studied sports engineering, but apparently he and his classmates would often spend their lunch break in a local brewery, and it was this that really got Benedikt very interested in beer. So he went on to train as a brewer with the Zehendner brewery in Mönchengladbach, who are very well known for their Helles beer, and it is beautiful. I would recommend that you check that out. But then he went on to do the Master Brewer Diploma in Berlin in 2012. But following this, he was offered a job at the London Fields Brewery, who we reviewed very early on in the channel. But this went sour actually after the owner was convicted of dealing drugs. But a few friends managed to get him a job working for Panama Brewing in Paris, and this was quite interesting for him because at this point when he joined the company they really needed more brewing capacity, and so he started brewing for Panama at the Kamba facility in Gundelfingen, which is quite close to Augsburg in Bavaria in the south of Germany. And it was while he was there that he really got to know the guys behind Kamba Bavaria, and this opened a lot of doors for him. So he decided he wanted to form his own brand, and he officially founded Blech Brut in 2018, but he had been working on the brand a little bit prior to this during his parental leave. But when his parental leave was over, he decided that he wanted to make Blech Brut his full-time job, and so he started brewing the beers at the Kamba facility, with the production beginning in 2018, and then over the course of 2019 he managed to produce around 400 hectolitres of beer. So what is that about? That's about 40,000 litres, I think. But he decided to can the beers as well because he felt that this would be a nice way to integrate art projects into the beers he was doing. But apparently the original idea he had from one of his friends was to engrave the cans, but this really didn't make sense to the company from a financial perspective or from a time perspective. But over the last few years, they've continued to develop new recipes, and they've continued to brew at the Kamba Bavaria facility, with Benedikt hoping that he can eventually open his own brewery on his parents' farm, which is very close to Bamberg. But as of February 2023, when we're filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 40 different kinds of beer, and they do have quite a few different styles in there. There's IPAs, paleos, saisons, quite a few different things. So yeah, Blech Brut is quite an interesting brewery, I have to say. And apparently the name is a reference to like raw art. It's not really anything to do with the kind of brut strain of yeast, if you like. So yeah, Blech Brut, like raw art basically, is the idea behind the name here. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Blech Brut for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Untappd page to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's everything we need to say about that. Let's go on and actually have a little look at the beer itself. So yeah, I'll just let you have a wee look at the artwork on the can before we open this one up. As you can see, this is quite similar to what we've seen from a few of the Duck Pond beers in the past. They have been releasing a series of beers actually just with this white background and a different letter, but you can see on the back of the can there you have both the Duck Pond symbol and the Blech Brut symbol as well. Plain silver top on the can there. It's 440 millilitres, and yeah, like we said earlier, it's an 8% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA, released as part of the local Småskaligt assortment through System Bolaget here in Sweden for February of 2023. This beer I think cost me 55 Swedish kronor, so that is about €5.50, £5 sterling, somewhere in the region of $6 American. This one is hopped with Brew 1, which is a hop I know fairly well, but not madly well, if that makes sense. It comes in about 14% alpha acid. It's American, and it gives you a lot of like stone fruit, but mainly a big kind of pineapple-y character from what I remember. But yeah, let's get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. I'm very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's as good as the other ones we've had from Duck Pond in the past. But this is interesting actually. This looks a little bit more like an American IPA rather than a New England IPA, come to think of it. But it does say it contains both wheat and oats, which is usually one of the definitions of a New England hazy IPA. But anyway, we'll need to see. But yeah, definitely not quite as hazy as a number of the Duck Pond ones that we've had before. I can't speak for the Blech Brut beers, of course. But you can see that this beer is poured with a finger of a frothy, I would say perfect white head. I don't think that's creamy in the slightest. Quite a few small bubbles toward the bottom there and a few bigger bubbles further up. But you can see the, yeah, you can see the smaller bubbles on the bottom there, the bigger bubbles going further up. But then you've got this lovely IPA sitting underneath that, of course. In terms of the colour of this one, I would describe this as more of a kind of rich yellow. It actually reminds me, the colour of this beer is a little bit more reminiscent of a nice German Helles to me, to be honest with you. Maybe just a little bit richer in its yellow colour. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts you put in will affect the colour of the beer as well. But yeah, the way it goes together is pretty nice actually. But like we say, this one to me, it looks more like an American IPA. It's got a little bit more of that kind of natural haze to it rather than the all-out kind of soupy gloopy type thing that you would get from a straight up New England IPA. So maybe I've been telling you a lie with this one. This maybe is more of an American IPA rather than the New England one. And for me, an American IPA is a little bit between the West Coast and the New England. It's got a little bit of the kind of smoothness you'd expect of the New England, the kind of yeah, a little bit of the smoothness and creaminess of the New England, but a little bit of the sweetness of the West Coast and the more floral character of the West Coast as well. But not much in the way of visible carbonation. 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there, but that head is just fading away to be a kind of thinner, foamy layer now. But I think we can go on and have a wee look at the aroma of this beer and see what it's all about. Oh yeah, this is quite interesting. I'm going to say straight away, it actually reminds me of a beer that we had on tap in the Bishop's Arms, Gustav, in Malmo recently. We had a really old school Vermont IPA, which was like the New Englands used to be way back in the day. You know, the first ones that you had from like Lawson's Finest Liquids had a bit more of the sweetness in the malt base from the West Coast, but the lower bitterness and a wee bit more of a kind of biscuity character. This beer Really reminds me of that, actually. This is a little bit more of a kind of farmhousey and like old school raw New England IPA in some ways, but you can definitely get the kind of smooth, oaty, creamy character out of this one, and also just a little bit of the wheat as well. But this is a really soft, light IPA, this one. I think this is going to be really nice to drink, actually. A lovely aroma, I have to say. Very curious about this. But let's try and just break it down and describe the aroma for you in depth, as we always do. So, backbone of this beer, it absolutely has a little bit of that fresh white bready bread crust to this one. So yeah, you've got quite a lot. For me, there's a lot of Jacob's cream cracker in this one. There are a few more kind of woody elements coming out of it too. But yeah, fresh white bread crust, little bit of wood, good bit of Jacob's cream cracker, and then you have just a little tiny touch of like a wholemeal brown bready character in this one, and it's almost quite a sweet wholemeal brown bread that comes out of the beer. Above that though, you have definitely a fluffy and again slightly sweet white bready character coming out of the beer. So yeah, I really like how that goes together, and you can also feel the wheat just thickening out this beer. The wheat kind of acts as like a smoothing agent in this one, actually. Yeah. So yeah, the wheat really acts as a kind of smoothing agent in this beer. There's a teeny little bit of bitiness in the back of the nose from it, but overall the wheat really is a kind of smoothing, has a smoothing influence in this beer, I should say. But on top of the, on top of all of that, you do smell a little bit of the oaty character as well. The oats take a little bit of a back seat in this beer for me, but you can still smell a little bit of the smoothness. So as I've always said, when it comes to New England IPAs, or quite often just IPAs in general, oats can give you a good idea of how old your IPA is. The newer the beer is, the younger it is, the kind of more creamy the oaty character will be. The older the beer is, the drier the oats will be. In this beer, you are getting a little bit of the creamy smoothness and a little touch of the dryness in there as well. But yeah, the way everything goes together in this one in that sense is pretty nice. So yeah, smooth oats, a little bit of dryness in there too. But yeah, there's quite a bit of sweetness coming out of this beer, so potentially that masks it a little bit. I do get quite a little bit of a kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotch type quality out of this one. And yeah, you can definitely smell that in this beer. There's a little bit of a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity character as well, and that kind of plays in well with the sort of crackery side of things. But like I say, this beer really reminds me of an old school kind of, some of the very old school New England IPAs that I've had in the past, the lower bitterness ones, but with that kind of sweet character and things like that. That's really what this one kind of reminds me of. So it's a very interesting beer from that particular perspective. But yeah, a little bit of biscuit, a little bit of Werther's Original butter candy, maybe just a little teeny hint of a sweet caramel right in the middle of the nose. But yeah, lots of woodiness and quite a bit of farmhousey character. As I've said before, for me, when it comes to New England IPAs, there are 6 different elements to think about in terms of the flavour and aroma. So you've got the more kind of farmhousey yeasty character and the riding and grainy side of things. That's a bit more common and a bit more prominent in American brewed New England IPAs, which is what I've been talking about here, referencing those old school New England ones. But you've also got the barley malt bread, the wheaty bitiness, the oaty creaminess, and the sort of sweeter side of things as well. Those are the 6 elements you should look for in this beer. And this one, as I say, quite old school and more, old school Vermont, kind of New England type IPA, this one. But it could well turn out to be an American IPA. We'll talk about that when we taste it. But yeah, in terms of the the green component of this beer, for me, there's a little touch of earthiness in there, but this beer has quite a wet, floral character to it. You do get a little bit of brighter, grassy character in there as well, but the whole floral, grassy sort of thing out of this beer for me is really quite wet. I haven't had Brew 1 on its own in a very long time, if ever. I really can't remember. But the green component in this beer is very wet. But remember, when it comes to IPAs, there are 3 different kinds of hopping. You can have early addition hopping in the first hour of your wort boil. That gives you mainly bitterness. Late addition hopping, which gives you a little bit of bitterness, but mainly flavour and aroma. That's the last half hour of your wort boil. After the wort boil is complete, you've got dry hopping. New England IPAs and more modern IPAs generally tend to rely on the latter two, so you get a more kind of bright green component to them, whereas old school like West Coast IPAs use all three, and that's why you get the big, deep, dank character for them. It's basically you heat the hops up and get all the chemicals out of them. It's basic chemistry in that sense. So yeah, that's what's going on here. This one for me is definitely late addition and dry hopping. It's got a more bright and kind of wet green component to it. But yeah, quite interesting for sure. On the fruity side of things, for me, this beer, you do get a very oily pineapple-y character out of it, but there are a few other things for me. Like, it has a little bit of a kind of sultana, you know, a dry white green grapey quality. I don't know if I'd say pear in this one, but yeah, sultanas are definitely there. Gooseberries as well, but yeah, quite an oily pineapple. The fruity character for me in this beer is very kind of straightforward. There's maybe a little touch of dry apricot underneath too, but yeah, oily pineapple, dry apricot, sultana, and a little bit of a sort of gooseberry thing. Very interesting aroma, I have to say. I do like how that goes together, but it really strikes me, it reminds me of this kind of old school beer that we had from, I think it was Foley Brothers in Vermont. We had that one on tap, and it was a proper old school, kind of OG New England IPA. The ones, of course, this style has evolved to be more creamy and things like that, especially here in Europe as well. So yeah, this could be a really interesting one to try, I have to say. But as I always say, take a wee bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck in, but we are definitely going to try this one now, so let's do it. This one is the Let It Be, a double IPA at 8% ABV from Duck Pond Brewing in Gothenburg, Göteborg on the Swedish west coast, and Blech Brut, a gypsy brewery based in Bamberg in Franken in Bavaria, Bayern in Germany, brewing their beers a little bit further south than that in Gundelfingen and in Donau. But yeah, let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers, prost. Ooh. That's nice. Yeah, I have to admit, I can see on the back of this one why they're saying double IPA. I think on some of the other cans we've had, they have said New England double IPA, but that's a very nice beer. Oh yeah. I'm going to say this, you know, the one thing you could always rely on Duck Pond Brewing to do is a really good, big, you know, kind of smooth, creamy New England IPA. Blech Brut, as I say, this is my first experience with them, but of course the name makes you think of Brut IPAs, which were really not that successful at all. But this beer that they've produced now, it makes me think a little bit. I would not be surprised if there's been a Brut yeast used in this one, just from some of the flavours that we're getting out of it. It seems like it might be some kind of mixed fermentation double IPA with a kind of regular yeast, but also with something, you know, brutish. So yeah, this is, for me, the first impression I have of this beer is that this is quite an oily and quite malty type IPA. This one, it has definitely got the kind of lower bitterness, although that does build the further into the aftertaste you go. You've got a sweet malty base in there, some oily fruits. Yeah, this is definitely quite different to what we've had in the IPA category for quite some time, and to be honest, this is welcome. There are, in my opinion, too many New England hazies out there these days, and it gets a bit boring. You know, I wish there were more black IPAs and West Coasts and things like that. So to have something like this, which is a wee bit different, and basically I bought this beer because it was Duck Pond, and I know I like this brewery. You know, you always get solid beers from them, but for them to do something like this that is a bit quirky and interesting, I really do like that. So thumbs up to Duck Pond, and of course to Blech Brut for doing something a wee bit different here. But this is going to be quite nice. So it kind of strikes me, as I say, between, it's got a little bit of Bruty character to it. It's also got the kind of old school, like really old school OG New England type note to it, but it's also kind of like an American IPA as well, you know, that more malty and kind of floral in between of the West Coast and the the New England one. You know, I've seen mountain IPAs and Colorado IPAs as well. It could potentially be a little bit like that. But whatever it is, I like the beer, and that should be the main question. You can talk about styles all day, but the main question should be, do you like the beer? For me, the answer is yes, so I like this. Let It Be is definitely worth trying. So, let's break this down and describe the flavour for you a wee bit more in depth. So, middle third of your palate, you can feel the backbone of the beer. You've got a little bit of that fresh white bready bread crust. Absolutely, that is there. Fresh white bread crust. Really like it. Toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you get a little touch of a more kind of woody sort of thing coming out of the beer. And then you've got some Jacob's cream cracker, definitely. But yeah, those notes do take a little bit of a back seat in this beer, I have to say, because above that kind of crackery note, you get this, it's not such a tall layer, but you get this really condensed and slightly sweet, brown bready character coming out of the beer. And that lingers there, so you got bread crust, cracker, brown bread, then you've got a little bit of white bread kind of sitting on top of that, like a fluffy white bread. Yeah, so you've got this sort of fluffy white bready character coming out of the beer as well, and I think that does kind of that layer does kind of expand a wee bit and get bigger the more that you drink of the beer. But above all of that, this beer for me is actually really quite it really is quite an oily affair, this one. Like above that you have this layer, and it's kind of like if you think of a McVitie's digestive biscuit and the sort of oily stuff that they use to stick all those different grains and stuff together, that's really what this beer reminds me of in that sense. So above that kind of white bready layer, and like I say, those four layers I've just mentioned are very condensed and pushed down. You've got this lovely kind of thick, condensed, oily layer to the beer. In the dead centre of your palate, you can feel it is almost like a kind of straight up caramel, and then as you move further out from that, as you move, you've got that more dense, oily kind of caramelly note, but then as you move further out from that, you've got a little bit of a more as I say, you've got a little bit of a more brighter biscuit, so straight up sweet caramel, but a little bit boozy. It's 8% of course, so you are going to get a bit of alcohol, a little bit of a sweeter kind of biscuit, like kind of oily biscuit, and then as you push out toward the edges of the palate, you do get a little bit of a more kind of straight up sweet McVitie's digestive biscuit note in there. And this is the thing that's quite interesting about this beer for me. I do actually get a little bit of oaty smoothness kind of down the middle line of the tongue, but it takes a wee bit of time for the beer really to show you that. And I don't really get much of the kind of wheaty character in that middle third of the palate either. So yeah, as I say, the middle third of the palate for me in this beer is condensed down, and it really squashes together. But definitely this is quite different to what I've had from Duck Pond in the past, and as I say, I can't speak for Blech Brut, but this is definitely a more kind of malty and kind of slightly farmhousey, woody, almost bruty type IPA. So yeah, I do like what this one's going for. It's got a nice sweetness to balance out some of the kind of woody characters. But I think that's everything. I think that is honestly everything we really need to say about the middle third of the palate. So let's look at the back third of the palate then. The border region between middle and back third of your palate, you do get a little bit of bready build up in there, and it's kind of like a slightly sweet brown wholemeal type bready character. But the back third of your palate in this beer is quite different. Normally it's the same as the middle third of your palate, but the layers are just a bit taller and so on. But yeah, a little bit of bread crust in there. And again, it's a wee bit drier. Remember, more dry and bitter flavours come out further back on the palate. So you've got a little bit of that. You've definitely got the cracker in there, which again feels drier. But then you have this more tall, wholemeal, brown bready character there. And you can feel that that layer is just a little bit more airy and taller. Then you get the white bready note above that from the barley malt, and then you can feel the wheat sitting on top of that, and the wheat is quite smooth in this one. It's not bitey as it can often be, but yeah, it is just a nice kind of smooth wheaty note that comes out of this one. And above all of that, you get the more airy, kind of farmhousey, woody type bready character coming out of the beer. So that for me is quite interesting too. And within that kind of yeasty layer that you get on the top of the back third of the palate, yeah, as I say, there's a little bit, it's like a fresh, really fresh, grainy white, well, not really grainy, really fresh white bread, a little bit of honeycomb and stuff, and it really gets sweeter the further you go into the aftertaste. This beer really does give you quite a bit of sweetness the further into the aftertaste you go. But yeah, back third of the palate, you can feel the flavour is taller. Then as you come further forward into the middle third of the palate, it condenses down and sort of squashes together. But I like this, I really do. This is quite different, and as I say, that's kind of why it captures my imagination a little bit. But yeah, in terms of the hoppy side of things then, back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, it gives you a little touch of herbal character, and as you push toward the kind of front corners of your palate, it's definitely got a little bit of a more kind of bright floral sort of thing. So yeah, I think it goes together really, really nicely in that sense. But it's not too bright and big a floral character. Round the front curve of the tongue, it's a little bit lighter and grassy, but it is a wee bit more kind of oily, I would say, for sure. The green component in this one is quite nice. And I do wonder, maybe there has been a little bit of early edition hop in this, because there is a teeny bit of dankness for me to this one. But again, it goes together quite well. But yeah, a little bit of earthiness, a little bit of herbal character. As you move forward, we touch a deeper floral note, and then round the front curve of the tongue, a more oily, grassy type character. So yeah, let's focus on that front third of the palate and the fruity side of things. So the border region between the front third and middle third of your palate, you do get a nice little bit of a bready build up in there. It's kind of, there is a bit of white bread to it in the aftertaste, but to me it feels like a kind of sweeter brown bread. The base of the front third of your palate, you've got a little bit of bread crust, a wee bit of cracker, and then a sweeter mix of white and brown bread, kind of like what I described in the border region. And then above that, you've got that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. And the fruity character for me is quite interesting in this one. Like, yeah, at the back of that front third of your palate, to me there is a little bit of like a sultana-y type base to the beer, but then above that you get a sort of oily kind of dried mango note. And then as you move further forward into the middle of that front third of your palate, you can feel there's almost just a little touch of like dry apricot or something, big oily pineapple on top of that. And the apricot kind of carries forward, the dry apricot carries forward into the front half of the front third of your palate as well, and then so does the pineapple above it. There's maybe just a tiny little bit of a slightly lemony, I don't know if I would say lime, there's a bit of a slightly lemony zesty character just behind that front tip of the tongue too, where you're getting all the grassy notes out of the beer. But yeah, the way that goes together, I think is quite nice. The fruity character in this beer is very oily, and like I say, a bit of apricot underneath and pineapple. Those are the two most prominent fruits for me, and a wee bit of like sultana and stuff behind it. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Brew 1 in this beer is really showing its more oily side, but that's probably to do with the malt base that they've chosen for this one. I'd love to see what the recipe for this beer was, just to kind of, you know, gain a little bit of knowledge. For me, I'm an ingredients nerd. I think about the chemistry in these things, and it goes together. You know, learning about that for me is really interesting. But a lovely beer, this one. I have enjoyed this mainly because it is quite different from what I've had from Duck Pond in the recent past. But as you would expect with Duck Pond, it's very well done, and it certainly has kind of piqued my interest a wee bit in Blech Brut as well. But yeah, let's round off this review then with a wee look at the mouthfeel. So yeah, for me, mouthfeel of this beer, it's kind of top end of mid-bodied for me. Carbonation is very smooth. It's got quite a slick, oily mouthfeel to it, but at the same time it feels clean. As I've said many a time before, the Nordic beers for me very often feel quite clean in their mouthfeel, but this is very oily and slick. In terms of IBUs, I think this is a fairly standard 30 IBU beer, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's actually 40. You do get a wee bit more floral character out of this one the further into the aftertaste, and it is a double IPA as well, so balancing it is obviously a big deal. So maybe 30 to 40 IBUs with this one, which is standard for the style. The hoppy character, as I say, is kind of brighter, which indicates late addition and dry hopping, and the malt base in this one for me, you've got a bit of graininess, a bit of dryness in there, but big sweetness, and also you've got that big kind of oily sweetness from the fruity character too. So overall, I think this is a really quite nicely done beer, this one. It gets a big thumbs up from me. So well done to both DuckPond and Blech Brut with this one. It's quite different to what DuckPond have done in the past, and as I say, I would be very curious to see what Blech Brut are doing, if this is the influence they've had on Duck Pond Brewing. But I think we can leave it there. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are, both from Duck Pond Brewing and from Blech Brut. We will return to Duck Pond fairly soon, and hopefully we can do some things from Blech Brut going forward. But in the meantime, check out my social media, check out their social media. This one was the Let It Be, an 8% double IPA. I think a mix of Brut American and kind of old school New England IPA in terms of the style of this beer, to be honest with you. Very interesting nonetheless. But this one's from Duck Pond Brewing in Gothenburg here in Sweden, in collaboration with Blech Brut from Bamberg in Franconia, in the northern part of Bavaria in Germany. But until the next time, Sláinte, Skål, cheers, Prost, see you guys very, very soon.